right now we have 1A done, 2 B's done, and a C and a D. Right now your marks for your report card are in your hands. So for the most part, they'll be just what those marks are, except for the B's. For the most part, most of you, between the two, I will give you the better grade. That being said, if you have like a massive difference between the two, I will look into the assignments a little bit more to develop your grade for that investigation. One thing I don't love about this first report card is like your report card is based off of one thing, which is not ideal. It's also super unfortunate the timing of where our test is going to be. My marks are due on the 17th. So you're doing your test the 18th. So I will try and get those marked as quickly as possible. Your report cards come out the following Friday. So for criteria A, it's an average. So if our factoring test kind of goes in your favor to boost your mark, you are welcome to just tell your parents that now my mark would be this for criteria A, right? You've had another test since then. It's just that my marks have a hard deadline before, and I can't get it done before then. I think for the most part, all of those pieces, all of your tests and most of those assignments, my comments and feedback should make sense. With the RoCo assignment, I want to speak to that a little bit more, and then I want to talk about your last investigation. So let's all turn to RoCo for a second. I just want to give you some comments and some general feedback, some general statements with this. So you're in grade 10. It should be souped up since grade 9, right? I expect more from you. With RoCo, a lot of you, our first formula to find out, sorry, let me make sure I say this correctly. The youngest age of your partner was half your age plus 7, correct? Or minus 7? Plus 7. Correct? What are like the variables? How would I define these variables better or very specifically? Khalil.
Age of the older partner.
Good. I really like that. So age of younger partner, X is going to be the age of our older partner. So for me to solve for the opposite direction of this, to solve for our oldest partner, I need to isolate X, correct? When I isolate X, we have to do our order of operations backwards, right? So the first thing I would do is minus 7 from both sides. So then my equation would read y minus 7 equals x over 2. Now I would times both sides by 2. So then I would get 2y minus 14 equals x. So the two equations you actually should have would be this one, pretending I didn't cross off the 2. And this one. It's minus 14 because when we work of like an equation, you have to cancel out that constant first, then you cancel out dividing by 2. What's really hard as a teacher, and I want to explain to you, like as you guys were doing this assignment, I don't think actually anyone in this room caught that. I had some kids in my other section catch that, but it's really hard, especially with these rubrics, is I can't always just lead you and tell you the answer. But then at the same time you're working on it, I can see that you've done something wrong. I kind of want to tell you, but at the same time, we're working through these things on your own. So if we didn't get this, I only marked you down on your criteria C rubric. You didn't have to show like this process. That's fine not to show it. But if you had shown it, then you would have seen that it's the second equation actually. And so that's why we decided to take it off of criteria C and not criteria D. As well as that way we could take it down less. It would impact your grade a little bit less. Ms. Chow and myself discuss that together, so it's kind of a consistent thing. It is hard because I noticed you guys didn't catch that, but I can't just say, like, that is part of doing an assignment too. For the most part though, otherwise everyone used like 2x minus 7, which is, I get the opposite but in math you can't just do it just opposite like that. 1 second, Khalil. The other mistake that I often noticed on your graphs, you had to be really specific. A lot of you just wrote like age and age, and then you wrote RoCo for like your labeling of your graph. You need to be so much more specific than that. So depending how you set up your graph, you even could set like age of first partner, age of second partner, age of younger partner, age of older partner. Like just your axes should be more specific. Once you graph it, your graph would have been not like that, like this, and they cross, don't they? Something like this, right? That's really bad. This one should be much lower. If you had done your graph correctly with something like that. Within that, on question number 3, where I said critically analyze, what's beautiful about this graph and what we really wanted you guys to be discussing is this space between our 2 lines is literally the age range that you could date. It's a beautiful graph and it communicates that really well because it gets wider as the partners get older. Initially, you shouldn't have a big age range that you should be dating when you're quite young. As you're older, the age gets wider, the space between those 2 lines gets wider. A lot of you in that question told me how to read a graph. There's more to it than that. And so it's kind of digging in that extra piece to get more at it than that. For questions 4 and 5, for the most part, you guys did really good there. I wanted you guys to really, like I told you this at the beginning, like you can't get those questions wrong, but you can provide not enough detail. What I meant by that is you have to tell me why it's, a lot of you use the word weird. Why is it weird for partners of a large age range to date? Why is it weird for a 15-year-old to date a 25-year-old? Weird is not very descriptive. So you really have to provide that extra detail. I'm looking for things like similar interests, not have similar interests. A lot of you talked about like legality behind it, which was really good, but getting a little bit more in depth in there. Any other comments about that assignment or questions in general? If you have a specific one about your assignment, come see me at lunch. You're always welcome to come see me then, or before school or after school or when we're working, but everyone else doesn't need to hear your specific questions. Is that one okay? Khalil. So if you were solving an equation, look over here. If we had the equation like, what was an h? Let's say 27, x over 2 plus 7. And I asked you to isolate and solve for x. What's the first thing you do? Good. So this is the exact same thing to figure it out. So then I would get 20 x over 2. Then I times it by 2. Doubled. Yeah. And so by doing it this way too, you'll see that the ages will match. So like the oldest partner you can date will match then the youngest partner you can date. And so if you plug the values in, you can see that relationship too. And so that was another really good check. That being said, a lot of you did do that check and were like, this doesn't work, which should have been your prompt to be like, maybe something doesn't work. The fact that you didn't make that prompt, I get it, because this is like connecting math to real world, and of course it's not perfect. So I can see why that wasn't always the perfect connection. So it was really good that some of you did at least recognize that it didn't work in both directions. Okay, let's talk about that perfect square trinomial investigation. So that was the second one, the one that had like our little arrows in it, the rubrics on the first page of it. On this one, it was really important for you to get a level 5. You had to be recognizing the B term. So we're talking here about perfect square trinomials. So with the perfect square trinomials, let me pull up the examples I gave you. So like on question 1, I want to tell you guys like how simple kind of stuff I was looking for. So on question 1, for example, they have, I'll use the last example. So 4x squared plus 20x plus 25. So question 1 only asked for just by looking at the trinomial. Just by looking. We're not doing any math. We're having like logical math sense. but just by looking. I noticed on all of those, the A term is a perfect square. The C term is also a perfect square. You also had to recognize the B term. Does anyone see anything about the B term? Like there's a pattern for all the B's. Jasmine? Good, and C. Your B term is actually the square root of A times the square root of C times 2. So that really is all I'm looking at for number 1. Even more generally, you could have just mentioned, like how Jasmine just said, B term, she's used the word match. It matches the factors of A and C, which in these examples, because of the ones we chose, I can see how you might miss that too. But she's recognizing that B term. A lot of you only talked about A and C. As well, you need to recognize something about signs. So with all of these signs, our C term is always positive, but our B term changed from positive to negative. So the other thing you're recognizing is C has to be positive. Simple, right? We're just looking. So you have to make sure you're reading the question really specifically. Some of you on question 1 started to answer question 2, which is totally fine. I get why that happens. You see things, you want to write down what you see. So I mark it all together. But that's as simple as it had to be for question 1. For question 2, then, I'm looking for like steps. Your steps can be kind of messy on this one. I would have personally have been like, okay, so if my perfect square trinomial is in this form, it's then going to become this. I would have put in like a variable there to help me out. So then I know D is equal to the square root of A. E is equal to the square root of C. Right? Pretty straightforward. The other piece, and this is where a lot of you missed, how do you identify the sign? So like dx plus E squared or dx minus E squared. So for question 2, that's all you needed to do, including that sign. So you can tell that sign, if your middle term, your B term is positive, then it's a plus sign. If your B term is a negative, then it's a negative. And that's it for that, like for step 2. You should include some examples there as well, but that's it. The last page is where it's really tricky, and I want to go through that one in a little bit more detail. Does that make sense for those first 2? That process? Yeah, cool. So question 3, a lot of you got really close. I was really impressed with it. So we're given a perfect square trinomial. So you know that fact that's a perfect square trinomial. We're given A and C, correct? We need B. I want to make sure I write this. Given A and B. I personally think it's a lot easier working almost backwards in this one, and I think that's what a lot of you did. We found earlier that B is equal to 2 root A times root C. A lot of you didn't include the root A, and a lot of you just said root C. The reason why you were doing that is we gave you examples where A was 1. The square root of 1 is 1. So that was easy to not include. You had to include that, though, to get full marks because A is not always 1. So it has to be able to apply for all cases. From here, I have this lovely equation. We're just isolating and solving for C. So you had to make sure you're doing your order of operations correctly. So I would divide both sides by 2. Those cancel out. You could do this in less steps. Then I have root A times root C. Divide both sides by that root A. To cancel out the square root, we square it. So then your final answer is B over 2 root A that whole thing squared will give us our C value. If you plug it in, you'll see that it works. When you're plugging it in, also you need to choose examples. You need to give me the trinomial, show me that it's a trinomial that's actually a perfect square trinomial and works, and then plug it in and be like, look, this matches it. Some of you gave me some verifications that had like pieces missing. Yes. Any questions with that? Does that make sense on those ones? Love it. Okay, so take your second, read them over, and then we're gonna make piles. I think we have 4 assignments here, so we're gonna make 4 piles over here. If your mark's on the first page, flip it over so no one else can see your mark, and then take out that notes packet for me.